So this Jewish guy comes up to St. Peter at the gate of heaven. And St. Peter says, "Oh, welcome home, follow me. You're going to room 17, that's where all the conservative Jewish people go, but when you get to room 5, I need you to be really quiet when you walk by." Okay, so they start taking the walk, they're talking. As soon as they get to room 5, they tiptoe past. And then they get to the room with the conservative Jewish community and have a good time. So St. Peter goes to the beginning of the gate again. And then this atheist guy shows up. And St. Peter says, "Hey, welcome home. Good to see you. You're in room 10. Let me just tell you that when we get to room 5, I need you to keep really quiet before you get there. Like, take your shoes off because we have to make sure that we don't make a sound." So St. Peter walks with this atheist guy, and they're talking. And when they get to room 5, they take their shoes off and they tiptoe past, and then they get to the room with all the atheists. And then finally, a Presbyterian shows up, and God says, "Hey, good to see ya. Presbyterians are in room 42. Let's go take a walk, but when we get to room 5, you have to be really quiet." So off they go. And before they get to room 5, the Presbyterian says to St. Peter, "Hey, why is it that we have to be so quiet when we get to room 5? And St. Peter says, "Well, that's where the Episcopalians are, and they think they're the only ones here." This gospel about God having a dwelling for everybody comes up, I think, every 3 years in the lectionary, but it comes up more often than that for clergy because it is one of the possible readings that are used during funerals. And maybe you think it's the only one that gets used during funerals, but there's a variety. The prayer book, I think, has about 5 different gospels that you can use at a funeral. And one of the things that priests do when they help families custom make their funerals for their deceased family members is they take you into the back room and they ask you questions about the person that has died to get a sense of who they were. And I've done this long enough now that I know pretty much what reading will best fit which person after you talk to me for about 2 or 3 minutes. So when I sit with a family who says, "Oh, my grandmother, she just gave all the time, anybody in need. She was always there, and she was always at church. And she always had a kind word to say. I never heard her say anything mean about anything. And she's my rock and my foundation. She was a living saint." I immediately say, Revelation, that's the gospel. And that one, the New Testament reading. And that's what the one that the prayer book suggests is about how we're going to gather at the great feast at the end of time. And we'll see God face to face. And we will see, like, all of the people who have loved God standing there praising God forever in white robes, singing glory, hallelujah. That's very comforting. So all the saints of the church, Revelation, I know what chapters, like Revelation 7, that's the one for you, and everybody's very happy with it. And then there are the people that you bring to be buried, and I ask you about them, and you say, "Well, my Uncle Ralph, there was a time when he was drinking really heavy, and he just blew through all of his savings, and he was a mess, and he ticked everybody off. But towards the end of his life, he started pulling himself together again. And, I think at the end he got sober, and everybody liked him again, and, he turned out to be a good guy after all. But he has an estranged wife that doesn't talk to him anymore. But the rest of us are, we're pretty much there. We're all about Uncle Ralph now." And so then, that would be 1 John. And the New Testament would be 1 John because 1 John, the lesson that is recommended in the prayer book is pretty much about, you know what? It's so true. All of us are falling short of the glory of God. But in the end, we are all God's children. And we are beloved and we're welcomed home. So it has that nice dip in it, right? And then, last person that you say, well, okay, tell me about your brother. And the family sits there and says, he was the cheapest, nastiest human being on the entire planet. He saved all of his money. He never paid for anything when you went out to dinner with him. And he never had a kind word to say. And he hated everybody. And after he collected $2 million, he left it all to the public library, pretty much to just flip us all the finger. And just, we can't stand him. And I hate to tell you, but there is nothing we can think of to say about this guy that you're going to be able to use during the funeral service. And I say, no problem. That is John 11. And this morning's lesson, which is, in my Father's house there are many rooms. So God is going to fix, you don't have to understand how God is going to fix things for this guy, but apparently there's room even for your creepy brother. God will make a space. This is the sort of thing I do all the time, by the way. And it's good, right? So this lesson, though, which we often hear at funerals, we most associate, I think, with death. But the irony is that it's not, from Jesus' perspective, about death. And the setting is the Last Supper. So for the disciples, everything's about death. They're terrified. They think they've come to an end. They know for sure Jesus is going to get crucified. There's hopelessness and despair, and everybody's panicked and full of dread, except for Jesus. John's gospel is very different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, when you get to the Passion narrative, the Last Supper, and everything that goes after it until Jesus' death, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus is very human. He sweats blood. He goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. He says, Father, take this cup from me if you will. He's crucified, and he even asks why God has forsaken him. So when Jesus comes to his suffering, he's really human in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You get to John, Jesus is no longer ever only human. Jesus is always God. And even the prologue, the first chapter of John, starts, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and he became enfleshed, and we have seen him. So you are told from the very first chapter of John, right away, this guy Jesus, who I'm going to tell you all these stories about, never forget he's God. He's always God no matter what happens. And the story goes on, and every time that Jesus says, I am, it's supposed to remind you, and if you're Jewish, it will remind you that he's God. Because there's somebody else who says, I am. I am what I am. I am who I am. Do you know who that is? It's in Exodus, and if you've seen the Ten Commandments, it's Moses who stands there and says to God on Mount Horeb, who am I going to tell Pharaoh sent me? And he hears this voice kind of resounding on the mountain that says, tell him I am sent you. So when you hear I am in John, you're always reminded, don't forget, this is God. Anything that Jesus says, it's God. Anything he does, it's God. And Jesus is saying, I am all the time in John. I am the way. I am the shepherd. I am the vine. I am the life. All the time. He's constantly saying it. So when Jesus this morning is standing there trying to prepare the disciples for his death, and they're terrified, and he tells them that he's the way, and Thomas is confused and asks, well, what way? How are we going to know how we can find you when we don't even know the way? And Thomas is thinking of a geography. What Jesus is really telling Thomas is, I am right here. I am the way. Look at me. Spend time with me. Give your attention to me. I am the way. You don't have to go anywhere to find me. And after the resurrection, the idea is that all of the disciples are going to come to see how God is present with them in ways that they couldn't have imagined before, through this incredible love that not only has he modeled to them, but he gives them, after the resurrection, he gives them supernatural ability to love one another. One of the things that I notice when I play with babies who are, I think it's 6-month-old babies, is when I play peekaboo with them, I get tired a lot sooner than they do. Have you noticed? You just basically have to end the game of peekaboo if it's ever going to be ended. Because this is like the funniest thing. You go, peekaboo, and every time they're like, oh, they're shocked and surprised. And you do it again, peekaboo, even if you don't go like this with a book, right? Even if you use your hands. It's never old. It never gets old. And you think, what's wrong with babies? Are they really just this? Is my child learning disabled? Is this something I'm... And do you know why it's never old for them? My understanding is neurologically, when they can't see you, when a baby is no longer able to see you, you no longer exist to them. They don't get it that if you are not in the range of vision, that you can still be there. So it's just as if you disappeared and suddenly magically appeared again to them. That's why it's always new. They have no idea that it's possible not to be seen and still be completely present. All I can tell you, I don't know what Jesus means when he says he's the way, but I do know that in my small life, I have known when I have played peekaboo with a child that I don't disappear, and I am very present. And I can only imagine that when God is trying to explain to us in John's Gospel that he's going to the other side of death because we're so afraid, and he's going to go to the other side and show us he is always there. And he is always present so that we don't have to be afraid anymore. Maybe as our parent, the parent of us all, what he's doing is showing us that just because he's no longer present in the room, that doesn't mean that he's not there. And not only that no matter how far away we wind up wandering in the world, we can't get off the way. And no matter how much we mess up, we can't mess up beyond God's ability to be able to love us. And no matter how lost we feel, there's no such thing as being lost to God. Because there is a love that is bigger than our ability to comprehend it. And the question at Easter is, if you don't have to fear death anymore, because God has gone to the other side and promised you that love wins, what are you going to do with the rest of your precious life? Amen.